Oh,
doing a
there
cyber
you
training
go.
for the chamber.
Is this an exclusive?
Yes. I'm going to go and tell them. Norm told me to tell them that. Make sure they knew.
All right, everybody, we're going to kick things off. We are now live on YouTube. I've got Mr. Brian. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I've got my backup or my there we go. All right, so let's start over here. We are live right now on YouTube, as well as for everybody here that's joining us live in the group. And very excited to have Brian Guenther here with Exceed Cyber. And we're going to talk about CMMC and all the fun that accompanies this type of compliance practices, security practices, and so on. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Never better, but it's been a busy season. So as CMMC bears down on all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And where I forget where you are physically located.
I'm in cyberspace. I'm virtual.
You were going to say
Yeah, exactly.
at his desk in cyberspace.
That's right.
Yes.
Exactly. So yeah. With a completely real background, right?
Exactly.
But no, I mean, I'm located in, we're a fully virtual company. We're a small firm. We're 5 people. We're a boutique organization, if you will, like law firms. They'd say we're boutique, right? But I'm personally located in Frederick, Maryland, about an hour northwest of Washington, D.C.
Okay, excellent.
That's where I'm physically located right now.
Yeah, I was just curious your location, if you were in the path of Helene or what's coming
Milton.
up with Milton. So definitely some scary stuff happening out there. A lot of destruction and and what's ahead of those right now in Florida is pretty saddening. So
It is.
So we're going to kick things off. Brian and I had a conversation. We recorded a episode just a couple months ago when we were in Atlanta at ChannelCon, and we were talking about CMMC. And one of the things I mentioned to Brian is that we have conversations about CMMC in our community on our calls, and I'd love to expand that. And, Brian reached out to me and said, hey, I'd love to talk a bit more. And so that's where we're at. Brian, you do have co-host capabilities right now. So if there is anything that you need to share, feel free. But
Sure.
I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you for the next 15 minutes to give us, just your background as well as a presentation. Then we'll open it up for everybody for any kind of questions, Q&A. So if you could just kind of save those questions for about 15 minutes, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I want to give a shout out to a couple of people. I see Chris Fagerstrom. He's in 7-figure with me. I haven't had a chance to meet him yet. Also, Jay Parisi, Blast from the Past. Good to see you, sir. Representing from Connecticut, I believe, right?
Yep.
So good to see you, sir. It's been a while. So want to give a big shout out to the folks here. First of all, thanks for being here today. And I'm just here to be the voice of education, not the voice of reason, or not trying to in any way try to beat you down for things you haven't done or thinking about doing and just haven't gone through. Just know that one of our focus areas for Exceed Cyber, since we pivoted a few years ago heavily into the cyber and compliance space, was really to become educators first, right? We're educators at heart. I want to make sure that I'm conveying and communicating to all of you out there who want to know and learn more about CMMC, what this is about, how it affects you, and where the hell did it come from, right? What is this even, where do we even begin here? So I figured it was helpful to start from the beginning, right? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
All right, perfect. So let's start at the beginning. So let's start with this. What is CMMC? And I'll talk in a second about where it comes from. And I can actually have a kind of a cool graphic that talks about the kind of the march of CMMC and where it began and how we got to where we are today. So you have to understand the historical parts of it. But first of all, know this. CMMC, which stands for, by the way, if nobody knows, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. If y'all heard of CMMI, Capabilities Maturity Model, that's something that's older. That's really what this kind of based on as a structure. But CMMC as a compliance framework applies to defense contracting firms. So think of your customers, if you have any, that serve the DoD, right? In some capacity, maybe they make widgets, they provide some parts or services to the Defense Department. We're only talking about DoD today. CMMC will probably eventually transcend the entire federal government. Eventually, it's going to happen. DoD is leading the charge and they're trailblazing right now. All right. So, but what you need to know is that the government has an interest in you as a defense contractor customer. Let's assume you're a defense contractor, right? In protecting their data. They do give a shit about that. They care that you protect their data and that you safeguard it. That's the word that they use. Whether it's federal contract information, like literally the contract that comes from the DoD to the prime contractor and flows down to the subcontractors below. Just think of like a general contractor building your house. They got subs, right? They got the electrician, they got the plumber, they got the drywall, they got the framer, all those people, right? They're all involved in creating these systems and processes and delivering a solution to the government, right? That's who we're talking about here, right? In the contracting speak. So what I want you to think about is like, okay, what information do I as a defense contractor hold? Now, again, I'll get back to in a second how you as an MSP tie back to this. This is important, but I want to give you the foundation. Why does it matter? Well, the government cares that you protect its data. And we're not talking about broad cybersecurity here, like we're getting into the nitty-gritty details. If any of you are familiar with the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, they don't care so much about integrity and availability. What they do care about is confidentiality, that the people that are not allowed to access their data can't get to it. And that if it's accessed, who's getting to it, to what extent that all happens. So federal contract information is important, but what's more important is what's called controlled unclassified information, or CUI. And that CUI is a much higher level of concern of confidentiality that the federal government, again, the DoD, wants to make sure you're protecting that information. So I'll pause there for a second because I'm going to show my kind of timeline in a second. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Very good. So starting there.
I like how I'm the voice of reason and
well, you're all well, someone's got to be the voice of reason, right? Because if you ask my wife, it's definitely not me. Just saying, right? All right. So very cool. All right. So we're going to share my screen here real quick. And I want to tell you share with you how we got here, right? So how do we get here? How did this even come to pass? All right. What you have to, and I'll talk about this sort of in this time frame, kind of what happened right here in a minute, but let's start at the beginning. So the government cares and gives a shit about what you do with its data. They do care that you protect and safeguard their data. Now, this whole journey with CMMC over the last 20 years goes back to 2004 when Congress issued its report on 9/11. It's a 9/11 Commission report. How did 9/11 happen? And there was a lot of information in there. One of the key elements that I want to share with you is about we got there and the impact of 9/11, the effectiveness of the terrorist attacks was so great because interagency communication, right? Departments talking to other departments and sharing intelligence and data was awful. It just didn't exist. It was terrible, right? And so that's one of the things that came out of that. Of course, we know that DHS, Department of Homeland Security, was formed shortly after 9/11, like just a year later, which is a massive consolidation of a lot of these departments or smaller agencies brought under a larger umbrella. Okay. And so that became very clear. Look, we didn't communicate well with each other. We could have probably avoided a lot of these issues, like different agencies, different intelligence outfits communicating with one another. Fast forward to 2005 to 2009. Y'all are familiar with NIST, right? Is anybody not familiar with NIST? I hope we all are, right? We're all professionals here. But NIST 800-171, we've all heard about. It's about safeguarding controlled unclassified information. It's 110 controls, and it's pretty big, right? But nothing compared to its granddaddy. It's big, the big daddy of NIST 853, that has like 900 something controls, and that's about protecting data on federal systems, again, government systems. 800-171 is a subset thereof. FedRAMP, by the way, if you ever heard of FedRAMP Moderate, also a subset of 853. So 853 is the granddaddy, the big dog, and then SP 800-171 is a little chihuahua, right? But it's got a bite. Just be aware of that. And so those were issued, and those created standards around safeguarding data, whether on federal systems or on non-federal systems. Then in 2010, the president signed an executive order about creating and classifying CUI, controlled unclassified information, and that we needed to protect that. That was now pushed out into the ecosystem as well. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. 2016-17, finalization of the mandate around DFAR 7012. Now, we're going to go with a lot of terms here. DFAR is Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. It's an extension that the DoD uses of what's called the FAR, Federal Acquisition, the way they buy products and services. And this DFAR 7012 clause, they established this to DoD and said, look, if you're a defense contractor and you have CUI, you must implement NIST 800-171. Got to do it. And they started baking into contracts starting in 2017. So this whole thing about, oh my God, the sky's falling, CMMC is coming, all this shit we got to do, pardon me, I should probably not cuss, but all these things we need to do are all completely new to me. The reality is that's crap, because these requirements to implement NIST 800-171 to safeguard CUI have been in contracts for years. They have been ignored. They've literally been ignored, okay? And so really what CMMC is, you have to understand foundationally, is not telling you what you need to do to be compliant. It's making sure you did what you're supposed to do. It's the checks, right? It's a checking mechanism. It's the certification or the self-attestation to make sure defense contractors do what they said they did. All right, then CMMC was established. Well, why was CMMC established? Well, the DoD had an inspector general, like a bunch of like this investigation where they said, let's look into these defense contractor firms and find out if they actually did the DFAR 7012 implementation. Did they do it? And what they found was nearly nobody did it. They reported back to the government. The government said, oh, crap, we got to do something about this. That's why CMMC came into play, which is, again, a verification mechanism. That's what this is, right? And then CMMC went through various iterations, went from CMMC 1.0 with 5 maturity levels to 2.0 with 3, so they compressed it down. And then now we're in 2024, and we're about ready any day now. CFR Title 32, which is a CMMC rule, should be dropping what's called the final rule. Then it goes to Congress for a 60-day approval or any kind of changes that they want to make. Usually it's rubber stamped. And then Title 48 next year, that's going to make sure that these CMMC clauses are in defense contracts. And so then the rollout and auditing, and that rollout period, by the way, was 5 years under CMMC 1.0. It's now 7 years. So there really is more than enough time to show the government that you complied. Now, I know that was a lot. That was like a fire hose spray. And so I'll kind of pause there for a second. Dan, you might have a question for me to follow up on that.
Sorry, I do not have any a question on that one. Does anybody else out there have a question for follow up on that?
So far, so good?
So yeah, it looks like
All right, very good. So here's where we're going to get into. Go ahead, after you.
No, I was that's a good sign. So
okay, very good. So hopefully I'm at least being helpful here. So like I said, my intention is to share with you what's going on. So the next thing I want to do is, first of all, by a show of hands, by those who I can see on camera, anyone have a defense client? Raise your virtual hand if you have a defense client.
I have offensive clients.
Yes. I have had in the past.
Okay.
Several, and they don't give a flying rip. Right. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's
okay.
exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. We're going to keep it PG-13, right? Because they think it still falls under PG-13, but then the other one still, that goes more to the R rating. So we'll keep it fairly light here. But again, continue the educational part. What you guys need to understand is if you have customers, and I want to be very clear, you may have a manufacturing customer. Let's just use an example, right? You may have a customer who's in manufacturing. They make widgets. You may not know that one of their customers is the DoD.
Right.
Pause for effect, right? You may not know that one of their customers is DoD, and they may have never told you. You've got to be very clear about that, because you have to understand who your client's serving, because the DoD is not a vertical. It's a customer type. It's a client. And that client has major requirements on their contractors. And by the way, those flow to you as an MSP.
And they flow to
Wouldn't it,
you even if you're unaware.
Even if you're unaware. That's exactly right. Eric nailed it. That's exactly right. They flow to you. And if your customer has CUI, and by the way, how does your customer know? Read your damn contract. Read your contract. And these clauses, these DFARS clauses are included in these contracts,
I got it.
sometimes by reference. They're not even explained. They're just like, DFARS clause 7012 applies to you. And they don't know what it means. They never read it. They don't have an attorney review it. They have no idea what they signed. They don't know what their obligation to the federal government is. Okay. And it's really important to understand that if they have to safeguard this data, which they may have all of your flat network, right? No segmentation, no MFA, no protections whatsoever. They're like, yeah, we don't care, whatever, right? You have a lot of folks that are taking this approach of like, we don't care because we don't think CMMC is real. We're too important to the defense industrial base of the supply chain. All these lies they tell themselves. Well, guess what?
Or we're not
That's
going to
coming-
get caught.
We're not
not
going to
gonna
get
get
caught.
caught.
That is coming to an end. Because here's why. Now you have to attest that you comply with the law. It's an attestation. If you're maturity level 1, that's only protecting the contracts, right, that you have with the DoD or with your upline sub or your upline prime. Or if you have CUI and you have to safeguard that CUI, that's all 110 controls, by the way. Just saying. If you have to safeguard that CUI, now that information, that process, you as a defense contractor, not you, but they as a defense contractor now must either attest that they did that, or in most cases, if they have CUI, they have to get a third-party certification, what's called a C3PAO, Certified Third-Party Assessment Organization. It's not R2D2's friend. It is actually an assessment organization, right? It's what they do, right? We have to inject a little bit of levity here, right? Because it's dry as, as a cracker. And so they have to now get assessed by a third party. Well, that third party is going to come in and they need to do that assessment. The reality is if they ignore this, when the final rule goes into effect and they haven't self-attested or gotten the certification, right? Either whichever is required, they haven't done that. They are not only going to lose their contracts and they're not going to get any new contracts, and they could be blackballed. And they could get what's called a False Claims Act suit by the DOJ, which the DOD would refer these false claims, essentially saying, you said in your contract you complied with this regulation. You didn't do it. We're suing you under the False Claims Act. Okay. Now you're in trouble. Major, major problems. There's also whistleblower provisions in these laws, right? In CMMC that can make sure that someone who blows the whistle on you, let's say an employee, they know that you didn't implement the compliance. They can blow the whistle and they get 20% of the haul. So there's a lot to think about here. And so I want to kind of wrap with that piece about what you and your customer primarily have to think about, because this can be there's a lot of risk for those who ignore it, a lot of risk. If they're DoD heavy, they're really putting literally their livelihood at stake. CMC is not going away. It's here. Forget that. If you think it's going away, it's here, right? It's a not bilateral. What's the term that enjoys like both parties agree? It's not unilateral. It's not a left or right.
It's a bilateral agreement.
Bipartisan. That's the word. I was looking for bipartisan. Thank you, Eric. I was looking for bipartisan. It's a bipartisan thing. Anyone in Congress or in decision-making, they care about national security. They care about our national interests. So therefore, it's not a partisan issue. This enjoyed bipartisan. So, all right. So I know that was a lot. That's on your customer side. How does it affect you as an MSP? So does anybody here want to jump into that space? Anybody? Anybody dare to say it? Do I want to jump into the CMMC space and be like eaten by sharks?
Well, I think that's a great question because I think, there's, I think different categories of MSPs, one, those that are like, no way in hell do I want to go down this path. The amount of liability, the red tape, the, just the ugliness of it. I want to stay away from it.
Yep.
Then I think there's there's those that say, hey, there is incredible opportunity out there. We can do this. I have the internal talent and I know that we can make this happen and build a practice here. And then thirdly, and there could be more, but thirdly, I think there's those that are maybe a little intimidated, not quite certain that, I mean, they see the opportunity, but they're not sure that they want to venture down this, or not sure how to get started.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk a little bit about, those three, in just kind of just expanding on your question there.
Yeah. And again, I'm glad you're going to go on that path because that's exactly my intention to share with you what the risk is, which we talked about before, right? And I want to make this very clear. If your customer has to be a maturity level 1, you as an MSP, what they call an ESP, an external service provider, you must also be at maturity level 1. If they have to be a maturity level 2 to protect CUI and they have to get certified, you as an MSP must also be at the same level, at the equal or higher level of compliance. So if you serve a DoD customer, be well aware, once this rule drops, you got to make a decision. The decision is, do I continue to serve them or, okay, keep going. Jay had a question?
Yeah, I was going to, as far as the trickle down thing goes, like if I have a client that's an accountant, say,
Sure.
and he has a client that's an office cleaning company, and they clean an office for a company that makes widgets for the government, that all flows down?
So if they're within the supply chain, in other words, if the contract flows down from the prime all the way down, further down, now an accountant is not going to have a contract with an office cleaning company. That's not, there's a disconnect there. If they work with an office cleaning company or a CPA and have relative relationships, it all depends on whether they're contracted to work with the government.
Okay.
This is all about whether your customer, let's just say they're a prime contractor, right? They work directly with the DoD, a direct contract relationship, not a sub below. You would essentially be considered, while you're essentially more or less a subcontractor, and all those rules flow down to the bottom. And as an external service provider, you have to be at the same level of compliance as a client. And that's where the lift comes into place, right? And I want to speak to that because Dan asked that question, talk about that very topic. Okay, so I wanted to start there. You must comply as well. And you have to yourself level up your business. I mean, it's a massive lift to do that. But Dan, I think you said that beautifully. Let's talk about the risk, but let's also talk about the opportunity. The vast majority of MSPs are going to tap out. They're going to be like, I'm out, I'm done, forget it.
Right.
This is way too much lift. But think about those who do stick around and those who invest in their businesses and see the opportunity when 90+% of MSPs are going to bail.
Right.
I think a lot of MSPs will start the process, will start going down that path and realize, oh crap, this is way more expensive and way more involved. It affects everything you do. Your entire tool set is going to completely change. First of all, your staffing could affect this as well. If you have offshore people, that could be impacted too. So there's a lot of things that really have to align, and you have to align them strategically to make sure that this is a fit for you. But if you do lean into this and say, I want to become, and by the way, we help MSPs also become compliant, not just contractors, because they're related, right? We can help both entities become compliant. If you want to lean into that, there's a ton of opportunity that you can now pick up when all of these different MSPs have dropped their customers and have to. They cannot legally serve them anymore.
Even in the case of, let's just say you leverage your resources and you say, hey, I see opportunity here, but I'm going to leverage resources. I'm going to partner with a company maybe like yours, Exceed Cyber, and I'm going to leverage your talent for me to be able to drive this business. That doesn't mean that you are off the hook if that MSP partners with somebody like yourself. Is that correct?
No, I'm glad you're asking that question because that's a really important clarifying question. We're not partnering with you and saying we're absorbing your risk. It's not that. We're helping you identify.
Damn it, I keep looking for somebody to take all my risks.
Yeah, when I have somebody hold the bag, right? When the cops show up.
Yeah.
Sure, that sounds good.
Right.
Wait, I might have been that guy.
It's an important distinction, right? I'm glad we're having a discussion around this, right? It's an important distinction. We're not here to quote partner with you to hold the bag for you. It's not how it works. You as a company, as an MSP, must be, again, you have to decide, am I going to level up and get on the same compliance as my customer? Is it financially worth it? Think about that, right? Let's say you have a $5,000 a month client. What's your profit on that? If you're lucky, top line and bottom line, maybe 20 points, right? You might make $1,000 off of that. Probably not worth it, especially if your client's maturity level 2. The lift to get there for contractors and MSPs can be easily $100,000 or more. Okay. So that's including the compliance work, the implementation of all the controls, the changing of your tools, the actual certification assessment by C3PAO, right? R2D2 SRED, all of that, that's all part of this, that calculus. And then you have to maintain at that level forever. Okay. So again, that's that lift, right? But
Right.
if you lift up and you say you have the intestinal financial fortitude to do that, the opportunity to collect all kinds of customers that have been dropped by their MSP that have a very small supply chain of MSPs to choose from, think about that.
Yeah. So in that case, when you are weighing those decisions of making that investment, like you said, 100,000, $100,000 lift to get there. Um, Given the fact that so many MSPs will walk away and drop out, meaning that there's a smaller pool of MSPs out there, I would think that the ROI is a much higher X for you as an MSP, given that there's less competition out there.
Yes, I would say that's fair to state, and keep in mind, because your lift to deliver those services is far more complex, right? Your maturity levels up, your complexity levels up. As such, your rates go up. You're not going to be billing $100 a seat, right?
Right.
Keep in mind all the things you need to protect now. This is a completely different conversation. And the level of protection and service you're providing and the tooling and the security and the safeguarding, all those components create a much more complicated relationship that the customer must have. They can bring it in-house, but good luck, right?
Let's also add another component to this. When we take a look at uh, regulation that might be coming down the line for all MSPs, regardless of whether it's defense or,
Yep.
a certain type of government regulation, you essentially are preparing yourself for the future that, if you don't do this now, you may have to do this in the future, or you might have to close shop, sell, be acquired, et cetera, et cetera. Would that be fair?
It's totally fair. And I'm glad that you're saying that. If you're talking about, first of all, again, CMMC is going to pervade the government entire. It's going to go across the entire government, the federal government eventually. DoD is just trailblazing. They're leading the charge because DoD is the biggest department, right? The largest funded. They've got the biggest budget and they can really kind of, throw their weight around a little bit, right? So think about that. But also, you mentioned other regulation. There's state regulation. There is a federal regulation pending right now. They're currently, I think, in congressional approval period called CIRCIA for critical infrastructure, right? That's massively being backed by CISA, right? Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Administration, right? CISA is massively backing CIRCIA. And that means, guess what? Guess what it says? Critical infrastructure. MSPs are critical infrastructure. No matter how you slice it, it's coming. Compliance is coming. MSPs will be regulated. You can fight me on this all day long, right? You'll probably win, but I'm just saying you won't win on the war of words, but physically. But regardless, my point being, regulations coming whether we like it or not. And that's really the lever that the government has, or governments, right? Whether you feel how you feel about the government, I'm not trying to get into a political discussion here, but that's a lever that the governments have to make sure the things that need to be done, that the free market doesn't do of its own volition, gets done.
And let's face it, I mean, when we take a look at, the MSP, the MSPs out there, and this is, not being, derogatory against anybody by any means, but there are many house of cards out there as MSPs that, are one tiny mistake away from disaster, and we need to ramp things up. We need to step things up,
Yeah.
be just across the board.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're right. I mean, we all hope that we're running a really great freaking shop and that we're, really taking great care of our clients. I mean, customer service is one thing, but are you really securing them? Are you talking to your customers, even if they're not DoD or government, right? You talking to customers about risk, or are you just letting them prescribe the path of service, right? Are you
Yeah.
putting yourself at risk by not talking about risk management, right? Not even governance compliance. We're talking about risk. Are you talking about that? Having those conversations? Times have changed. Those of you who in this program know what this means. Things have changed. Cyber attacks are way up. And guess what? If your client gets popped, chances that you're in the blast radius are very high. It's almost a certainty, right? That you're in the blast radius and you're affected either legally or financially, right? With culpability of some sort. And if the customer doesn't come after you, guess who is? Their insurance carrier.
Yeah.
So independent of whether you work with the government, we all need to do better because things have changed.
And ignorance is certainly no defense, and we cannot put on our blinders.
And you hear these people, and again, we've all probably talked with them firsthand, and we've had this conversation like, yeah, don't believe CMMC is coming, or I don't give a crap, whatever, and then they're all going to be crying when their business got taken away, or if let's say they're largely a government shop, they get shut down. Eventually, they're going to have to comply. But those are the laggards and the ones that want to keep their head in the sand, right? And they're out there. We've all seen them. But we as MSPs need to do better. But think about the opportunity, right? If you guys, even if one or two of you on this call say today, I hear what Brian's saying, the opportunity is huge. And if you can be the go-to certified CMMC shop in your region, and you can pick up all that business when no one else can, think about that.
And you expand your region by going there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can expand it even further. Let's say there's no CM, because all this, by the way, if you have a maturity level 2 certification, there's ways to find that information, right? I believe the certification itself is posted in a government system called EMAS that spills into a program called SPRS, which is where contractors look for. But let's just say, you go to your customer and say they're a DoD, or a prospect, even better, they're a DoD. Well, show us your best rate. And they're like, well, this is how we charge. And by the way, you may not have known, but you have to work with a certified company because you will have already found out if they have COI. Are you a defense contractor? Yep. Do you have COI? Yep. Guess what? And so you can be much more prescriptive in what you do. Eric, do you have a question?
Yeah, but when you're ready.
Feel free to jump in. It's a conversation. Feel free to hop in.
So here's, let me take a little different tack on this and how especially smaller organizations are likely to look at this.
Yep.
Think about what's happened with HIPAA. How many actual HIPAA enforcements have there been?
Mm-hmm.
This has been around for 20 years. How many actual HIPAA enforcements have there been?
Mm-hmm.
It's a handful. And while I completely understand and agree with we should be protecting this stuff for, our national security, I'm not sure it's going to get treated that way in the wider market. I think there's going to have to be some actual enforcement actions that are public enough that people see them. The problem is, and we have the same problem in other areas of cybersecurity, is NBC doesn't show up when your 10-person shop gets shut down for whether it's a cyber breach or because the government comes and packs up all your crap and takes it. Been there, done that.
Sure.
It just doesn't make the news. So, and what, the problem that we have is, well, we're not Boeing. So yeah, Boeing got busted, but we're not Boeing. So we're not, we're not in that blast radius. Yeah, we make this one valve that happens to go on, on something that is sold to the government, but they're not coming after us.
Yeah.
I know it's not the right thing to do. I know that it's, I get our side of it, but how do you convince these, especially smaller organizations that have to make a massive investment and have massive ongoing cost?
It's an excellent question, Eric, and I'm glad you asked it because I do have an answer for you. First of all, I want to answer sort of that ancillary piece that you mentioned about companies that get popped. They're not in the news, right? You're not too small, right? You're not too small to get breached. You're just too small to make the news, right? That's a quote from someone that I borrowed, and that's true. That's irrelevant to this conversation. I'll tell you why. Because the DoD, especially the DoD, and eventually it's going to be the larger government. Right now, it's just DoD, has mechanisms by which they will be able to identify through your requirement to attest. It's a requirement to attest, right?
So I attest.
You attest,
but I lied.
You attest and you lied.
How do I get caught?
Yep. let's say the way you're going to get caught, guess what? You're going to have a breach and someone's going to blow the whistle. Now, are you willing to take that risk, be barred from federal work? This is a debarment from all federal work for 3 years. Are you willing to take that risk? And that's really the question you got to ask. And that's why it's important for you guys all to know this, to have this part of your talk track, to talk to customers about that who don't give a crap, right? And say, look, you can play Russian roulette here, right? With maybe one bullet out of 10 chambers, right? Out of whatever. I know Jay's the gun guy. He can probably educate me here, right? But you can play Russian roulette here, and one day you're not going to get lucky anymore. But if you did have a breach and you claim to be to have self-attestation, by the way, with maturity level 2, there is no self-attestation. You have to get a third party to attest and certify you. Just to be clear. Right. With maturity level 1, that's a very low bar. It's only 17 controls. It's low. Maturity level 2 is 110. You have to get a third party attestation. There's a very rare exceptions for self-attestation at level 2, but by and large, a third party. They have figured this thing out. And if you think it's like HIPAA, not even close. HIPAA had zero teeth.
I don't think it's like HIPAA. I understand that.
Right.
What I'm saying is the way it's going to be enforced, if it's as lackadaisical as HIPAA,
it's not as lackadaisical as HIPAA. That's the thing. It's
here.
designed very differently. Josh?
Yeah, Eric, I'm with you 100% here. We've had a series of very small players that needed to achieve in 1.0, CMMC 1.0, they needed to be L1 or 2. In 2.0, it appears they'll need to be only 1, but we're not sure. Self-attestation, let's save some time. We'll just call that lying, because that's what they did. And that's why CMMC came about, because prior to CMMC 1.0, lying was de rigueur for smaller and even some larger organizations. The challenges, Brian, are we deal with a lot of 5, 10, 15 seat players who are $1, $2, or $3 million businesses.
Yeah.
I can't, the first question is always, okay, what is it going to cost? We can't even estimate that as MSPs. I have taken to telling people L1 might be doable for 10 or 20 or 30,000, depending on the level you're coming, and then L2 isn't going to be less than 6 figures.
That's right.
So if L2 gets adjudicated, let's call it, and they have to achieve that, they're done. They're literally done. And so far,
they're done.
7 players, 5 of them did nothing, and we just couldn't work with them. One of them went out of business trying to just achieve L1, but he was ITAR compliant as well.
So yeah, that's a whole different animal. Yeah.
And now I have a second one, and it's unclear whether they're going to fall into L1 or L2, but they're also a $1 to $2 million company, and they are not going to spend 6 figures to do it. Of course, they can abandon their government work, except in this case, it's 100% of their business. The one that went out of business, it was 100%. They're just not willing to do it. And unfortunately, as an MSP, I don't carry the weight necessary to get them to wake up and smell the CMMC. What we need is an organization, an authority, or something outside of ourselves to explain to them, you can't dodge this bullet. There's real teeth in this beast, to mix the metaphors, and it's coming now. The biggest challenge, though, is from my reading of it and from others, we need to be at the level that they need to be at prior to them being there. So even if we're only covered level 1, CMMC covered science, we need to achieve that ourselves. Now, as you pointed out, 17 controls, self-attestation, which in my case won't be lying, we can do that.
Sure.
But L2 changes the game completely, especially considering how few of the organizations, but there's less than 40 companies in New Mexico that are over 20 employees that are CMMC compliant or should be.
Right.
So at least that's the number that we got. We actually paid somebody to look, because I thought, should we be that go-to place? It's easy answer for me. No, I can't even hope that we're going to find enough of those companies. It's a tiny pool. That's completely different depending on your market. This all boils down to one simple thing for us. Who's the authority that they're going to believe this matters from?
Well, again, first of all, Josh, thanks for that. I appreciate it. By the way, I'm a fan of your photography. I know you're a good photographer too, and you may not know that I know that you're a photographer, but
He does
thank you.
amazing with his camera phone, doesn't he?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people post your stuff, and I've seen your stuff on Facebook. So anyway, first
He's
of all, good
he's got
job.
a quick take
Um,
150, I believe.
and I swear I'm not Google stalking any of you. I just happen to see that. I happen to remember names and faces. So who's the ultimate authority? At the end of the day, education is key. And if you have a trust with your customer, let's just say it's you, and say, look, we have to have a serious conversation. We take this seriously. We cannot get embroiled in defrauding the government, because if we continue to work with you, we'll be doing that. We're bowing out. And that should be some indicator that you're serious about this. If they choose to go on and defraud the government through false self-attestation, they can't do it through the assessment. The assessment takes all of that away, right? For level 2. However, for level 1, yeah, the bar is lower, but do you want to take that risk? But Josh, I agree with you. You're absolutely right. Like, how can you force them? You can't force them. It's a business decision. But here's the reality. If you cannot comply with this and won't, do you want to take the risk, or you just say, you know what? It's not worth it to me. I'm not going to make that investment, especially at ML2. I'm not going to make that investment because I can't stomach it. I may have 500K in revenue a year, but my margin's 5%. I make 25,000. I can't justify it. And those are all important conversations to have. I'm not here to twist your arm, but I'm here to tell you, especially if you have COI, and if you don't do this, you can't even lie about it. There's no way.
Well, I was very late. I'm very sorry. I'm not sure
Okay.
if you mentioned that these are criminal charges. Should you actually lie to comply with CMMC?
They can be criminal. It's not necessarily, but yeah, if you lied, then it can become criminal very quickly. You're right. I'm not a lawyer, but
that has been hammered into us. And the challenge for us is, can we support these companies? And for me, the answer has always been no. But can we support them if we present to them that they are compelled to address this compliance and they choose not to? Where does that leave us, the MSP? Are we exposed to that? My guess is yes.
you are. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So if you even entered the conversation as the MSP and left, do you have a duty to report?
Oh, rat them out, you mean?
No. Okay. So you meet with somebody
Right.
who needs to just be CMMC 1. You talk through it. Yep. They're not going to do it. Do you, as an MSP who now has knowledge of the fact that they are not CMMC 1, right, do you now have a duty to report to the government that, hey, yeah, they're not actually doing this?
If you don't have a contractual relationship, I don't believe you can be compelled to do that. And again, this is a legal question that I'm not comfortable answering unless any of you guys are lawyers. I'm not. But I'm going to find out, because I have an attorney.
I slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
There you go. There you go. No, I know several GovCon attorneys who will be able to answer that question. Dan, I'll get back to you on that so you can report back on that specifically, right? If you're an MSP that's engaged in that conversation, they choose not to move forward, do you have a duty to report? My gut check is no, because you have no relationship with them other than prospective conversations, right? It's almost like the Good Samaritan law, right? You see somebody that's in trouble, are you compelled to help them, depending on where you are, right? If you saw the last episode of Seinfeld, you know why they got jailed. If you remember that.
Yeah. So is this the time to register mspwhistleblowers.com and
that is a great name for a law. Think about that. The law firm, if they grab that MSP whistleblower, holy crap, I'm going to register that like right now.
There you go. There you go. And if there's a bounty,
don't bother, already did.
Bounty, you could be doing sales presentations all day long. And you don't even have to pick up the business. You just turn them in and you get your bounty and you move on.
And you know that bounty, you know what that is? It's 20%. I mean, if they get a judgment, because this goes to court, and
right,
whatever, it goes through the whole due process, right? But look, it's not insignificant. But
right,
to your point, it is a heavy lift. And really what these defense contractors, many of whom are, again, nearly all of whom are served by MSPs, they need to figure out, is the government enough business for me to do that, to engage in that uplift, right? And that maintenance. It's not just the uplift, but then you have to stay there. right? So you have to reach cruising altitude and stay there. Whatever energy requires to stay there, you have to expend that every year.
And also, I guess the decision of if you're going to go this route, obviously it's always baby steps. It's always, cart before horse type scenario. We all, whether you've gone to college or not, you may have put $100,000, $200,000 into going to college, not really knowing if you're going to get a job. And I think the question then in this case is, how do you progressively get into this space? Can you progressively get into the space, or are you jumping in completely, jumping into the deep end right away?
Can
I
you
think
enter
you'd
the
have to.
space as a contractor or as an MSP, to be clear?
As an MSP, yeah.
As an MSP, can you enter the space and get into that space? I mean, depends on whether you've got financial backing. You have a lot of
Right.
money to invest in this. Again, it's all about your financial intestinal fortitude about whether you want to invest in that and whether that strategically aligns. To Josh's point earlier, he had a really good point. He said 20 or 40 companies in New Mexico to whom this even applies.
Right.
Not that it applies to, but that are large enough that, in my mind, you need to be 20 seats and up
To make sense for you.
Yeah,
Right.
makes sense for them.
It-
I don't know how much their business is CMMC. There might be a tiny business that's 100% CMMC covered that'll make the effort, but it's rare.
Right. And you have to consider that is what's called your addressable market, right? If you think about that, my minimum is 20. And then if 20 of those are, that's my addressable market for this. Doesn't make sense. How many do I think I can get? How many do I think I can get from others? But also keep in mind, if you are set up in such a way that you can take clients in other states and then you use boots on the ground for other MSP friends we have, because we all have friends in the business, right? We know each other, right? And so
Would those guys have to be CMC compliant if you use the boots on the ground in another state?
So let's just say they're going and installing a piece of hardware, have no meaningful access to the network, or let's say they're just delivering or setting up a laptop on a wireless network where there's no CUI. It's a good question, Jay, but in theory, you can stage it in such a way that they don't, because you want to have very controlled access for those non-employee boots on the ground, whether it's, again, other MSPs, contractors, Field Nation, whoever you're using, right?
I want to jump in. I just want to jump in and throw one thought.
Yeah, I know we're nearing the end.
So when you take a look at any entrepreneur making an investment, starting a company, there's always an investment, and usually it's a pretty substantial investment to get up and off the ground. We are in an industry where there is very low barrier to entry. And I'm not saying you don't have to have money, but there's a low barrier to entry. Now,
You have to have $1,000.
Right.
There's no
right.
barrier to entry.
Hang a shingle.
Except for signing a Kaseya 3-year contract.
Well, you can sign the contract. Doesn't mean you can pay.
For God's sakes, let
Right.
Well, let me just keep on here. I do think back to my when I first started my MSP, I did make, purchasing an RMM, it was $60,000 for 1,000 seats, right? I was making an investment back then. But, as the SaaS model took over and, you just kind of pay for your consumption, your barrier to entry is really nothing. So we should not be squabbling over the fact that we might have to invest $100,000 into our business to be able to expand our business and drive in more revenue, because that's what businesses do, right?
They invest in themselves.
Yes, so I think we've been conditioned, one sec, Jack. I think we've been conditioned that we can easily expand our businesses because a vendor says, hey, yeah, this, you go down this path of, security awareness training. Well, you just pay for a number of seats that you need. It's no big deal. This is a big deal, but we shouldn't be squabbling over having to make an investment. Josh, go ahead.
It's not the investment. It's always the ROI, or in this case, potential ROI. And
Totally fair.
The investment, as you said, Brian, I told these people, we met a ton of them in the beginning of 2020 before COVID, when 1.0 started to have an impact on subs.
Sure.
I told them this is not a weight loss program. This is a lifetime fitness program.
Sure.
And
I love that phrase.
Brian,
that is good.
also had these 400-pound people, and I don't mean literally, standing in front of me saying, hey, I need to be on the balance beam in a couple of years in the Olympics. And, drag a balance beam in front of them, their first question was always, what's that thing? They were so far, literally every one of them I met didn't have basic IT services or cyber hygiene at all. No firewalls, no backup, no endpoint protection, no patching, not one single one of them. And in New Mexico, it's common for 2/3 of the businesses I meet to be there, but not for 100%. So this was this like undiscovered vein. These were people hiding under rocks. And all of a sudden, they had to come out from under the rock and build a frickin' pyramid. And it was such a leap that virtually every one of them said, no, no way, not a chance. And I was fine with that because it's good to fail fast. But
fail fast, fail often, right?
Yep. Now we're in phase 2, which is the few. One went out of business. One of them dropped his government work. One of them we still have.
Yeah.
He did all the basics. He replaced everything and has a stack and maintenance and a full, MSP program. But his attitude is, okay, now I'm fine, right? Not even close. That was basic training. Now he's going to be in combat. And pardon all the mixed metaphors, but the bottom line is they don't realize what they're up against, and they're not going to make that next leap. He thought 20 to 40 grand that he spent to get somewhere was a lot. And I'm pretty sure he's going to be an L2 site. And he's not going to believe me. He won't even believe me that he has to believe somebody.
He has to read his contracts. If his contract says DFAR 7012's 522 421 FAR clause, I mean, there's certain clauses in there, and that dictates what you are.
All right. So here's my parting question for I have to.
Sure, yeah.
I know that you're not here to sell per se, but I am going to ask you, what's the useful takeaway? Are you in a position, you are physically, you're all within 50 miles of Washington, D.C. Every damn CMMC person I ever meet is within a 2-hour drive of D.C. I know
they're not all here, I promise.
I know, but for the most part, it's true. Are you able to engage with an MSP and a client to explain to them as an authority what they need to review? And if they accept that reality, engage with us and them to get them on the path to compliance?
Great question.
Not only can I do that, we do it regularly. And in many cases, we even, because we talk about money, right? We're kind of a little forward that way. And we do it respectfully. Like we talk about revenue, we talk about percentage of defense work. And we actually ask that question about how much of your revenue, let's say they're a $5 million shop, or let's say 1 million, make it very easy, right? Easy math. 1 million, how much of that is DoD work? 20%. That's 200K. How much of that, what's your profit margin? We don't really get into profit margins, but we're assuming with DoD work, it's not great. It's fairly thin because you have to be competitive. Let's say it's 10% profit margin, maybe 15 if you're lucky. So now you've got 200 grand, it gets sliced down to 30, right? And the question we ask is, are you looking to pursue more DoD work? Well, not really. This is it. Well, you might want to consider getting out of the space because you have CUI, and I wouldn't recommend proceeding. It doesn't make sense financially for you. Plus, you have to pay your MSP more money. And to answer your question, can I do that? Yes, for sure.
Okay. That is useful information for me, and I'm sure others. And those are exactly the right questions. And unless they're a sole source provider, some unique component there where they are going to have more margin and they have a little bit of leverage, they might buy some time.
Yep.
They're not going to do it. Now, it turns out that the guy who folded his cards that was ITAR compliant, he was a sole source provider.
Yep.
But I saw his assembly. I never asked him what he's making and what it's for, but I know enough about space physics and heat sinks to know that I was looking at things that were built for zero pressure environments at extremely low temperature. I get it. I know what it's going in. That makes sense. But it's a heat sink. He gambled that nobody could replace him as a supplier, and he failed.
He was wrong.
I'm sorry?
He was wrong?
Oh, it appears so. He works for the company that replaced him, as far as I know. So, which is not a bad career path. I think it was probably a good call. He bought a business without really realizing what he was getting into, especially as ITAR is concerned. So that's all I got. I know how to reach you now.
Yeah,
Because
and I put my email address in the chat for those of you who care to reach out. Feel free. I'm happy to have another, again, kind of adjunct or auxiliary conversation to this. I hope you found it helpful. And again, like I said, we help companies that want to level up, whether it's an MSP or a defense contractor, right? In this case, they want to identify where they are. We always start with the conversation. We don't engage the conversation saying, "I'm going to sell you." I really want to figure out if you're a good fit for us. I really do, because I don't want to waste your time either. Right. And if that first conversation goes well, then we go into what's called a pre-assessment. Let's say it's figure out where you are today. We go through probably about 30 to 45-minute list of questions, if you will, right? A whole list of questions, and identify what their maturity, complexity is, and figure out, we ask those business questions. Should you be doing what you do? And does it make sense for you to enter the space? Or perhaps you want to consider, again, a business question, should you be in the space at all or get out of it? And not to do so in an inflammatory and insulting way, but it's really to be helpful, right? I don't want you to get into trouble.
it was really helpful for me. Sorry I was so late.
No, no problem at all. Glad you're here, Josh.
Thank you, Josh. And I did throw Brian's a link to his LinkedIn profile in chat. So if reach out to Brian. Brian, thank you greatly. Excellent information. If anybody has any questions, I'm sure Brian's more than happy to schedule time with you, and you can reach out to them. But with that being said, we're at the top of the hour. Who wants?
I just want to, just a little side note, Brian, did you evolve FrogWorks into this, or you got out of FrogWorks and started this? How did that turn into this?
Boy, last time we talked has been a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you can look, if you want to look at my LinkedIn link, you can see sort of the history of what happened here, but FrogWorks was a whole different life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we started focusing on cyber and compliance several years ago. Probably around the time CMMC was announced, we started looking at that more seriously. And so that's more of our focus today. Again, by the way, just so you know, we are going to be leaning into becoming a certified MSP ourselves. That tells you something, right? If you guys know Wes Spencer, Wes Spencer who co-owns Empath, and he's been around Perch Security, and he's been around forever. He says, we eat our own tacos, because who wants to eat dog food? But eat your own tacos. And we eat our own tacos, which is, we're leveling up, because we had really leaned away from MSP and really more cyber compliance. We're leaning back in now. So I want to tell you that, because this may help you, right? So I'm talking, literally practicing what I preach. And I'm telling you guys, again, if there's an opportunity region, think about it too.
Excellent. Brian, thank you again. Everybody, thank you for your time today. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. We'll see you guys on Friday, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care, everyone.